Hello and welcome to the That's So Craven podcast, your one-stop shop for all things Fulham. We are back and it's a disappointing one as Fulham go down 2-1 at St James's Park to Newcastle. Another defeat on the road and an injury crisis that seems to be ever growing. Questions to be asked, and to talk it all through, I am joined today by Elton. Dad, how are we today?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you very much. It's a beautiful day here, lovely blue sky behind me. And am I happy to talk about this one? I'm a little bit blue, to be honest. I think I wouldn't say something's wrong in the state of Denmark or rotten in the state of Denmark, but I feel like there's a shift. And I feel like for the moment, good times seem to be far behind us.
It's frustrating because there is kind of a lot to talk about, whilst also being a game where it was sort of, I don't know, it just didn't feel right from the very start. It was off, and I mean, let's jump straight into it. The first thing to talk about was the lineup in this game, and I mean, I sent a message out to our little internal WhatsApp group, and just my only comment was confused, because I genuinely was confused by the selections. We'd seen obviously a couple of injuries and some fitness issues floating around at the moment, but I guess looking at the lineup, we had Tete come in, Diop and Bassi as a central pairing. Obviously, Bassi got dropped last week for Cuenca, who I think played very well. Anderson's injury obviously meant there was going to be a shift there. At the back, though, were you expecting to see Diop and Bassi, or did you think Cuenca gave a good enough account of himself to keep his spot?
Yeah, a really tough one. I mean, Bassi's been a stalwart for us. So I think Bassi's exclusion was largely international duty related last week. It has to be. But Cuenca really did a very, very good job, and he continues to impress, doesn't he? And so his displacement, I think, was very unfortunate for him, because I think he did nothing wrong against very, very tough opposition last week. But you wouldn't, there'd be a moment of reflection on that, and then but it's Bassi coming in, so that's fine. Diop has proven himself, and I take my hat off to Diop. He's getting very, very little, very few minutes, really. And yet he's keeping himself fit. He's keeping himself pretty sharp. And every time he's called on, he actually is doing a very, very good job for us. Obviously, a big blow to lose Anderson. And it looks like if that's a soft muscle injury, soft tissue injury, that could be a few weeks. We don't know. Again, happy to see Tete back. Continuing concerns that Robinson is out. We had a little conversation about that last night, and it can only be that his operation was a bit of a disaster, really, because if you thought he was going to have that operation and the rehab was going to take so long, then one wonders, would he have had the operation? When would it have been scheduled? But this cannot be planned. It cannot be part of an expected rehab period. It's really bad. I mean, we have absolutely no visibility of how long it might be, and he's a really important player. And I think it's genuinely affecting us.
It is confusing. I agree. I think the biggest thing for me is just we sort of hear little bits and pieces about what's going on, but just not anywhere near enough. It feels like we've been told that Robinson isn't fully fit. He's not quite there, but he was on the bench, and then he wasn't on the bench. He came on and played some minutes, and he's not completely ready. Didn't get picked for the international break, but it seemed like that was a decision to allow him to be ready for instantly after the international break, and that was the first international break we're talking about. And this one's dragging now. I mean, we're 9 league games into the season. I think it's 11 games in total we played so far, and Robinson's played 20 minutes max. I don't know exactly how much, but it is worrying because he's such a key player to us and so key to the way we play usually our style that it is a big loss. The one positive, I guess, is the fact that Cess has come in and been outstanding, and I think he's probably our most consistent player this season and potentially one of our best players this season as well, I'd say. So we're fortunate in a way that it hasn't cost us too much, but it is a little bit of a worry. And then moving forward into the middle of the park, let's look at that central three. The return of Lukic, really good to see that he's come back from what apparently was a bit of an unknown entity in terms of an injury, but good to see Lukic and Berger together. And then Josh King started every game so far this season, dropped for Smith Rowe. That was one of the aspects of my confusion. Your thoughts on that?
I doubt it was a form thing. It must have been purely tactical, and Silver believing that there was some particular reason why ESR would do a better job, or that Josh King was best suited to come on late as a sub. I don't know what the thinking is, but given Josh King's recent form, it can't be that he was dropped in favour of ESR. And I really doubt it was a disciplinary related selection. So, you got to default to Silver. He and his team obviously had some kind of view that was a better selection. Just to circle back to your point and the thing we were talking about, I have to say that out of all the concerns around our squad depth being tested, and some weakness in our squad in general, our defence has really stood up incredibly well. Every single,
all things considered,
single so-called second liner has done brilliantly. Cuenca's done so well. Castagna's continued to do a pretty decent job. He's not preferred over Tete in my head, but he's done a pretty good job, and there's no major complaints. Yeah, a couple of incidents here and there where against very top opposition, you're comparing him to a man who is so brilliant at one-on-one. It's an obvious comparison that we'd make, but generally they're pretty interchangeable, and there's some combinations there that work very, very well. And Cess, we said it last week, and I'll say it again, he continues to, do really, really well. I think we all appreciate that Robinson and the likes of maybe Kevin on the wing could be a really enticing and exciting prospect, and we'd love to see those really dangerous overlaps and attacking moves. But really, they've done pretty well. I agree with you, Lukic. Good to see him back, and he had a pretty good game yesterday. Looked very up for it. And obviously, he got on the score sheet, which seemed to puff his chest out even further. But he was very, very good.
And then out wide, we lost Harry Wilson. I think he picked up the injury during the international break, which wasn't ideal because, admittedly, he hasn't been putting away chances, but he's looked dangerous regularly. Now, with so many shouts for Kevin to come in and to start, were you surprised to see Adama start at right wing? I know there's been some chat about the fact that he was up against Dan Burn, and maybe his pace could have been influential in the game, but were you surprised to see Adama rather than someone like Kevin, for example, who has obviously shone and seems ready for a start?
Actually, I wasn't surprised. I think Adama's selection is largely related to our injury situation. I think if Harry Wilson was fit, he'd be preferred. Although, and who knows, players plays with injuries, and they generally hide it pretty well, and you may not really know what's bothering them, but it might just be that little, not even half yard, but a quarter yard of pace or speed out of the blocks that is normally a feature of their game that just isn't there. And it might be imperceptible, but it somehow has an effect. But even against Arsenal, Harry Wilson got himself into good areas, but he was just a bit off. His shooting wasn't very good. Or maybe we're expecting a little bit too much, and we're expecting a worldie every time he lines something up outside the box. But so in answer to your question, I wasn't actually that surprised, because I think if you break it all down, given all the injuries and all the imbalance around the pitch, maybe as flush as we are for wingers, maybe Silva didn't have that many choices in the end.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'd say the frustration is the fact that Kevin has looked dangerous every time he's come on, and I was expecting that we'd see Kevin eventually. It just starting to wonder like when that's actually going to happen, because it feels like this is the time for Kevin and it doesn't happen. And then we get some more injuries, and you go, okay, well, this surely must be the time for Kevin, and it still doesn't happen. So,
Well,
you just sort of left
there's a topic
wondering.
there, isn't there? Well,
100%, and I think we'll get onto that at some point. But like I said, that's maybe a much longer podcast episode. Look, I think across the board, I understand a lot of the substitutions, and I think in general it worked. There's probably only one which we'll get to, which was the sort of root cause of both of the goals. But let's crack into the game itself, I guess. The first 10 minutes, Dad, was worrying, to say the least.
stressful.
Very stressful. There was a few shouts of, let's just turn this off from the Discord, and a few people just saying, I'm leaving, I can't watch this anymore. Because it did, honestly, for that first 10 minutes or so, look like we were going to concede 7 or 8.
Well, to be fair to Newcastle, I thought their intensity and energy was fantastic in the opening sort of 10 minutes. And it's very easy to point to the mistakes that we were making, or the lack of flow and fluency in our game, which we normally sort of, normally it's associated with a Fulham team. But if someone is coming at you very hard and they're well organised, and they actually are targeting certain players as well in terms of even more pressure, then those kind of errors are forced. So you've got to give some credit to Newcastle. I think they were all over us in those first sort of 7 to 10 minutes, and had a number of very close calls and missed opportunities, which, like you said, it could easily have been, we could have been 2 or 3 goals down in the first 15, 20 minutes.
Oh, if we were lucky, I'd say. It should have been more. I mean, they hit the post a couple of times. There was Walter Marder stabbing the ball against the post, which I know you thought was in. It looked in at first, and I kind of shocked at the fact that they didn't manage to score there. Jacob Murphy had one that I think Leno tipped onto the post, or maybe hit the post. It wasn't very clear on the replay. Couple of efforts very early on where I'd say they should have gone ahead, and Fulham did settle into the game eventually. I think after the sort of first 10, 15 minutes, I remember turning to you and sort of saying, this looks like we're finally actually settled and we're kind of in this game now. And then having done that comes the first sort of major flashpoint, unfortunately. Bassi dilly-dallying on the ball a bit, and we do see him do this fairly regularly. He does invite pressure, which I know defenders are meant to do in some instances when you're trying to break through a block. But he just gets caught out, gets dispossessed by Murphy, who is one-on-one with Leno at that point. It's a good finish from Murphy, although I do wonder if Leno maybe should have done more, because he does hit it from a very long way out. He gets a slight hand to it, but not enough to keep it out, and Fulham go 1-0 down. As I titled this podcast, Dad, our own worst enemy?
I think you've got to remember, let's not forget just how well Calvin Bassey has performed for us over the last couple of years, right? So, number one, he's got an enormous amount of credit in the bank, or should have, in the Fulham fan base, and certainly with the coaching staff. And he plays in a certain style. He's very, he's very physical, he's very bustly, and he actually does like to be fairly tricky. I've seen him do that move, that little pullback, almost kind of Cruyff turn, but I've seen him do that so many times and actually get away with it so many times.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so, look, that one cost us very dearly, because Murphy does a good job. I actually think Murphy, to be fair, maybe Leno could have done a better job and got his lines better. But Murphy goes out wide. He draws Leno. Leno is covering his near post. And if you look at the angles, Leno does get a little hand to it, not a strong enough one, unfortunately, but he's actually threaded that through pretty well. And so you've got to give him credit for the finish there. I know it's a little way out, and people want to jump on the narrative of, Leno's not good from distance, but I actually think Murphy's done a very, very good job there. He's reacted really well to a Bassi mistake, which is it's a concentration error. If someone told me that Bassi had a late night or he's got a virus, I'd believe it, because that's kind of his decision making looked a bit impaired yesterday on a couple of occasions, and only two occasions that we know caused problems. But there were more than just those two, where he just looked a little bit off, just not on it. If you found out that something, kind of tumultuous was happening in his personal life, you'd go, oh yeah, makes sense. No, seriously, it's the stuff that he normally plays like that, but his timing and his precision and his execution is just better. It's not that he was doing something that he normally doesn't do.
Sure. No, look, I think we can all agree that Bassi does play on the edge, if you will, which is fine, and it's kind of what we like about players like that as well. It's that little edge that is an edge, if you will, like that's what you kind of look for in players, is something a little bit special, and it does come with mistakes.
That's something we can clip, Jack.
Yeah, probably. it's the edge is the edge that we want. No, but you know what I mean. It's similar to when we saw Josh King make that mistake. It's the fact that they do that, and they can make a difference by playing in that style and playing in that way.
Well,
unfortunately, you just have to accept that sometimes there will be mistakes. Sometimes, though, you're not punished in the way we were punished yesterday. And one thing I want to talk about a bit, and we'll probably get onto it with Marco Silva when we do talk about him as well, but this idea of credit. And look, I'm a Bassi defender. I think Bassi is a great player. I love what he adds to the team. Well, he is. But look, I think he's. If I had to pick a starting centre-back pairing, it will almost always be Anderson and Bassi. And I think Cuenca's a great player, but he doesn't break past those two at the moment for me, because I think they're more consistently consistent. Geez, I'm really nailing it today. But this idea of credit, like Bassi, like you said, it seems like there's something going on and he's just slightly off and out of form. And I agree, he's got credit, if you will, but I think that credit is we're not selling him, because we know he's a good player, and he's just off at the moment.
But what credit means for me is that I'm not suddenly, I haven't suddenly formed a view. Oh my God, what is this player that I thought was something?
No, you're not a hater for sure. But
it's not even that. I'm not even talking about love or hate. I'm talking about whether I've suddenly changed my view on this player because of a few things that he's done, and that I'm now concerned at his quality. I'm not at all.
Sure, but what I'm saying, it's a similar one with Marco Silva. People, arguing back, saying, we shouldn't. Silva's job shouldn't be considered at this stage because he's built up so much credit, and I understand that. But how far does credit actually take you? I don't think that protects you entirely, and
absolutely
you get to continue the way you're going just because you've got credit in the bank. At the end of the day, you lose a couple of games that you should win in the Premier League, and that kind of equals relegation at that point. It's Scott Parker style fine margins, and you can't allow credit to actually have that much weight. I think in terms of credit, it's not like now Bassi, because he's made a couple of mistakes, drops to the bench for the rest of the season and automatically becomes third choice centre back. I think the credit is saying, yep, he's made a mistake. We move on and we don't change our opinion on him, and we don't say he's a shit player now just because he's made a mistake. That can sort of be the credit. It's more about their consistency and their ability than credit, if you will, because I think credit sets sets the wrong tone, maybe for the
Well,
conversation.
maybe we're splitting hairs, and it's nuanced, and maybe the
Sure.
language is not quite right, to use the word credit. But I think also you have to look at time horizons here. I would say that the way human beings work is that you tend to have bad days and good days,
Yeah,
and you
absolutely.
might you might you might make a number of unusual decisions, or certain things may not work in a sequence on a bad day. It might even be a bad week, but it's generally time boxed, right? And if Bassi did one of those every 2 or 3 games, I'd be concerned that he's got some decision making problems. If he did that every 3 weeks, just one of those every 3 weeks, regardless of whether they resulted in a goal, but we lose possession in a key area, and he puts everything under huge amounts of pressure, and he continues to do that, I'd probably start having some concerns about his quality.
I just think he can't do that once every 3 weeks. If that was happening, the credit is gone. And I guess that's the other conversation. Like, how long does credit actually hang around for? How much credit do you really get? Like,
No, well,
his
you're coming
mistakes on the
back to
weekend.
you're coming back to continually use the word credit. I'm trying to move away from it and saying, look,
No, that's
players build
fine.
player you build up an image of a player, and this is how a manager would look at it. You watch them in training, you watch their reels before you buy them, you watch them in training, you watch them in matches, and you actually see a lot more than you even see in glimmers, in sort of moments in matches, because you see them day in day out on the training pitch. You know how they react, and you build up a level of confidence around their ability to deal with certain situations, pressure situations, execute passes, do various skills based things, right? And I think that in a way forms the credit, if you like. It's the picture that you build up, your knowledge base of that player. And I
So
and I think a couple of mistakes don't change that greatly.
here's a question then: Is what we're calling credit actually just form? Like, do you, because like you
No,
say, if you
no.
continually make mistakes, um, that would count, I'd say, as
Well,
bad, currently being in bad form, and therefore you should be dropped for it.
well,
How long does it take to lose your credit?
it's like that. It's like that saying, form is temporary, class is permanent, right?
Hmm.
And if if form is time based generally, okay, because there are some players who are in form all the time. I can't think of anyone, but maybe their form doesn't drop that much. But someone can be very classy and have a bad patch of form for sure. And I don't think that's the same thing as credit in the bank. I think it's the knowledge base that you have around a player, that you know what his capability is on his best day, and even what his minimum level always is. And then his dip in form is not because he's bad quality, it's because he's going through a bad patch. It's time based, it's going to change. There might be some psychologicals around it, or maybe he just comes up against a string of very, very good opposition who keep showing him up. But, back to Bassi, I don't think he was playing on exceptional opposition. I don't think that was the issue yesterday that was actually forcing errors. I think he was just being a little tricky, a little bit lackadaisical, like you say, on the edge. He does those things, gets him out of trouble. It actually buys him space and time more often than not. And so, like you say, we love him for that, and that's his little superpower, if you want. But yeah, look, I think we're in vehement agreement that there's nothing overly concerning about uh, Calvin Bassey, the footballer and the player in our team.
Yeah,
But
it's not
can,
about
can
his
you just
ability for
can
sure.
you just stop doing that, uh, and causing and actually resulting in goals?
Well, skipping probably too far forward, but at the same time, to pose the question quite simply, um, does Bassi keep his does Bassi keep his spot? Obviously, the Wickham game is a bit of a write-off, so I won't say next game, but for our next league game, would you start Calvin Bassi, assuming that Anderson is probably out?
Uh, Look, I think that depends, and it depends on the stuff that we will never know, but Marco will know, because Marco will be intimately involved in the day to day in these players, and he'll bloody know if Bassie's having to move home next week, or he's had an argument with his partner, or whatever it is, and it may be, those kind of fine things that are affecting him. He may have had a virus, he may have had a hangover from the international break. I don't know. But if it was some sort of external factor affecting Kelvin Bassey, because a lot of things have to be right, in order you have to be really well prepared mentally for a game of Premier League football. And if things are a bit off, even the most skilled players going to potentially be vulnerable to making mistakes. If there are some externals that can be sorted out, then I'd be backing Kelvin Bassey 100%. Not that Cuenca isn't up to it. He's a fantastic deputy, but I'd still be backing Kelvin Bassey.
Well, no, I'm not sure, to be honest. I wouldn't mind seeing Cuenca and Diop starting the next game if Anderson's not right. Just because I haven't fully lost faith in Bassey, but I think it just sends a bit of a message, and I'm kind of surprised that Marco hasn't sent a message already, seeing as he is a manager who does like to send very clear messages. We've seen him drop players fairly regularly.
Those two will probably start. They'll probably start at Wickham, Jack. Cuenca and
that's
Diop.
true. And look, I think if they do, I mean, they should have almost nothing to do against Wickham. But if they do a decent job against Wickham, I wouldn't be surprised if he just sticks with them, knowing that they can actually do the job together. And I think individually they've both proven that they can actually do a job. I thought Diop yesterday was very good. He was on Walter Marder, who has been superb this season so far. I think he's got 5 goals in 6 games for Newcastle this season, or something crazy.
I thought he was great. I thought Diop was really good.
I think Walter Marder's conversion rate is something like 35 or 36%, which is like unheard of in the Premier League. Most players sit around like the 10% or less. So Diop, he obviously, it seems like he studied and sort of worked out what he was going to do right from the off, because he's stuck very close to Walter Marder. Maybe, again, on the edge, but I think he was on the edge fairly, and maybe he'd spoken to the ref beforehand and said, what can I get away with here? If he's backing into me, can I put my arms around him, kind of thing? But he did a great job. Walter Marder, a couple of dangerous moments, but really was kind of kept out of the game in general, and as proven by the fact that he got taken off. Unfortunately, it was the replacement striker coming on who actually probably caused the second goal, but we'll touch on that later. I guess in general, Dad, with those changes going forward, how did you feel we played? Because we've struggled a little bit with Berger not really being on this season. I thought he had a pretty good game yesterday. I thought Adama, despite me potentially being a bit worried about him coming into the lineup, thought he actually played pretty well. He made quite a few good choices down the wing, got into some good areas, put some balls into the box. Your thoughts just in general on how we played yesterday going forward?
Well, like you said, if you listen to a lot of the conversations and the chatter on the Discord elsewhere, it's I think it's tempting to be apocalyptic and very sort of dramatic about it. I don't think we played terribly. There were a couple of really key mistakes which Newcastle capitalised on and put goals away. Obviously, that counts. I didn't think we played terribly. I think there were moments and periods where we actually looked really, really good. It just didn't click. And at this level, you've just got to put a lot more consistent periods of football together, both in defence and attack, to make it count. And I think we just didn't do enough of that yesterday. There were periods where we were a little bit poor. And so I think I'm far from disheartened that, oh God, this has all gone to shit, and what's the future here? Not at all. I think it was, look, Newcastle haven't had the best start, but I said to you 2 or 3 times yesterday, geez, they've got a great squad. I'm quite envious. I'd love to have a squad with some of those picks. They've got a really, really good squad, and they haven't really put it together yet, but you can see there's some individual real brilliance and a very good team, well managed. So it's not exactly like we've played a, you know, pick it Burnley or someone like that at home and have been embarrassed. Not at all. We've gone to St James's Park, tough place to play, um, and on the whole, personally, I didn't think it was an awful performance at all. I think it had some big holes in it, but not, you know, yeah, it's by no means a disaster. I think the real problem is that we continue. We've still got these injury problems, which is making life very, very difficult for us. It's actually creating even more frustration because if Marco was ever minded to feel like Chukwueze and maybe Kevin are ready, that's kind of gone out the window now in terms of him feeling brave enough to blood them as starters. Um, so it's a very messy situation, little period we're in at the moment. And of course, there seems to be all sorts of other stuff brewing and bubbling and festering in the background, which is not helping anything at all.
Fulham 1-0 down at half time. Usually we struggle to see any changes, and Fulham usually come out after half time looking pretty lackadaisical, I'd say. But we were, well, I say we were. I'll pose the question. Were you surprised that Smith Rowe was brought off at half time and Kevin introduced?
Have you forgotten the first 45 minutes of sitting on the sofa with me last night? I was spitting about ESR. I was really annoyed with his performance, particularly off the ball. I just got to a point, I remember everyone telling me that I had to wait another season, maybe this season is going to be it, it's suddenly going to change and he's going to be the player that we gladly spent that sort of money on. And, if I think about the definition of a luxury player, on one side of the equation, it's someone who delivers, regularly delivers incredible quality and is very fruitful. In other words, he scores a lot of goals as an attacking midfielder. But on the other side, he can be allowed to be, or he can be forgiven, and he's relieved of certain obligations that a normal player in the team might have. In other words, chasing, 50-50s, pressing, and defensive work. And boy, he comes up short for me. He runs around. He looks like he kind of feigns that he's pressing, but it's not convincing, and I don't think it creates any pressure on the opposition at all. He doesn't like a 50-50. I don't know if he's scared or he's worried that his hairstyle is going to be messed around, but he doesn't like getting stuck in, and I commented, Josh King, half his size and weight and half his age, not half his age, but half his football experience, is in there like a mangy little dog and scrapping for every bit of the ball. And I get so frustrated with Smith Rowe because he just, to me, the optics are that he just doesn't care to try hard enough. He just doesn't look like he cares enough.
Yeah, look, it's hard to make a judgment. I think actually so far this season, Smith Rowe has played well coming off the bench. I think it's worked quite well for us. But it just, him starting yesterday just didn't work. And I definitely still feel like I'm in the Smith Rowe camp. I think he's a good player and I think he's very talented. I'd just like to see a little bit more from him starting. I think the worry is you see him come off the bench and play well. You sort of go, well, why can't he start and do that as well? And it's just not quite come together this season for him. So I still want.
But you asked me the question. You asked me the question about whether I was surprised that Kevin replaced him. Absolutely not. Surely
it was very clear. I don't think he had a good game yesterday. I think we've seen better from Smith Rowe this season off the bench. which is why it was a little bit disappointing because I think we have seen him do quite well, and he just didn't show that at all yesterday, which is yeah, it's just a bit annoying really because you know that he can play well, and we've seen him play well so far this season, and he couldn't do it, and I don't understand what's going on there really. Like he just should be doing better constantly, and he's just not. It's
Well,
just
two
getting to the
things there,
point where it's
Jack.
very frustrating.
Two things to be balanced about it and fair to him. I think if you compared last season to this season so far, I think there is an improvement. I think he's certainly in a couple of games he's been very good actually. But he's mighty inconsistent. His efforts are mightily inconsistent, and that's doesn't seem to fit the kind of Fulham squad and attitude, which surprises me because he must be aware of it, and yet he can't seem to motivate himself, or maybe it's just not in him. I don't get it. But I've seen it in little flashes. There've been a couple of games. I can't remember which game it was this season. I've seen it when he looked really energized. He's a totally different player. I don't doubt his quality at all. Not at all. I think he's incredibly talented. And when he combines with other players and even on his own individually, he's very skillful. Just don't see it enough, and I don't see any consistency.
Yeah, and I think the flip side of that, as well as the fact that Josh King has been so good this season, it's such a shame that he didn't get another start in a game where I think he could have actually had an effect on the result. He came off the bench, wasn't really able to get himself into the game. The game was very stretched at that point. Wasn't getting his foot to the ball as often as we'd probably like. I just would have liked to see him from the very start because I think he's such a good player and kind of becoming integral to everything that we do, and a lot goes through him. One thing that we did see for that sort of short period of time was Iwobi switching centrally, which people have been calling out for constantly. And once he did switch centrally, that's actually when we created our goal, which came from Iwobi actually regaining possession at one point after Kevin lost it down the wing. Ball gets recycled, comes out to Iwobi again, who plays it to Kevin. Kevin plays a lovely ball into the box, which Jimenez gets on the end of against the crossbar. Lukic followed in perfectly, sacrificed himself big time because he saw the massive cut he got to his eye socket there. And I think it was Shah who had to come off after getting, Lukic's rock of a head into the back of his head, and it's obviously splitting him open. So, look, the equaliser, and Fulham at that point were actually looking quite good, I thought, Dad. Firstly, your thoughts on the goal, and secondly, why we couldn't actually make it count from then onwards, and sort of allowed Newcastle to get back in the game despite us all of a sudden sort of looking like we were building into the game a little bit more.
So firstly, I thought Kevin was bright. I thought he was really good, really, really good. There were two notable crosses that he fizzed in, beautiful crosses that were really dangerous. And we were a little bit unlucky not to get a better result on the end of that. Just pure unlucky. I don't think we did badly, but I think it was just a little bit unlucky. And had he maybe been involved for a bit longer, he might have seen double the number of those, and who knows, we could have got a game. Just another comment on the King and ESR selection choice. I actually think that ESR's selection to start and Josh King's introduction so late in the game was probably a massive factor in us being pretty impotent yesterday and not being able to score enough goals or create enough opportunities. I thought Kevin was really, really good. I like him. I love his energy. I think he's cheeky. I think he's ambitious. Of course, he's got a concerning lunge in him, but it's kind of like the Bassi situation. That is where he's on the edge, and I like it. I think he's a terrific player, and he's very entertaining. And I think he probably. It's been unfortunate that the likes of Robinson, who can, create such a lot down that wing. We've probably been deprived, and maybe Kevin's been deprived of that kind of service, and perhaps having strikers who are injured, not in form, changing round all the time. He hasn't really had a consistently good focal point up front for him to get the ball into. So I'm encouraged that we haven't seen the best of him yet, and I think circumstances have sort of conspired against him somewhat. Look, I thought the moment we equalised, I thought we were well and truly back in it with a chance to go ahead and win it. I really did, and it just didn't turn out that way. But yeah, for the neutral, once that second goal went in, or our first goal, it was a pretty entertaining game that was absolutely end to end. Probably highlighted by a lot of mistakes, frankly, and turnovers, but still very, very, very entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, that last sort of 20, 30 minutes was high octane, high energy, and like you say, quite entertaining. Not if you're a Fulham fan, I'd say. Although we had a handful of chances, but onto the goal that sort of definitely decided the game. Unfortunately, again, it's another mistake from Bassi. He gets caught on the ball, a couple of heavy touches, tries to play a pass across to Cess and has to sort of slide and underhits it, doesn't get it to Cess. And it's a big Newcastle counter-attack. I think it's Asula who picks up the ball, who'd just come off the bench, who's a big boy, presses very hard, and won the ball back there. Takes a shot, Leno palms it, probably doesn't do that well, Leno, I'm going to say. And again, I love Burnt Leno, and I'm a big defender of his, but as a goalkeeper myself, you have to be putting that ball out of play. Instead, he palms it back into the danger area, and it's a very simple finish for Bruno Guimaraes to put into the back of the net. Dad, disappointing again mistake from Bassi?
Oh, yeah. I kind of felt for him at that point because it was terrible. It immediately looked like it was, Cess had the kind of problem on his hands, but it was absolutely not his fault. If that ball was hit properly to him, I don't think he would have made a mess of that at all. He had enough time to deal with it. As it was, Newcastle capitalised very, very well. I thought when you were describing the build-up and Leno's performance, I thought you were going to say, as an elite goalkeeper myself,
as an ex-elite goalkeeper myself.
Yeah, as a former elite goalkeeper. But you're right. Look, in an ideal world, he parries that. He puts it round the post for a corner even. But just if he pushed that wide, it would have been all the difference. He pushes it back into a fairly dangerous area. And interestingly, when goalkeepers practice, they relentlessly get a shot against them, and they get themselves up to their feet very, very quickly. Seemed like he stumbled a bit. He didn't get himself back on his feet.
He didn't get himself up very well, and it was on the floor as the follow-up gets knocked in. And you're not expecting to be up, but the best keepers, you see those double saves. You see David Raya do it a lot. He's very good at making a big diving save and then instantly getting back to his feet and making the second save as well.
Leno's generally pretty good, actually.
He is usually good.
There was definitely a problem there, which left him very vulnerable to the second shot.
I haven't watched it again. It could be a little slip or something. I don't think it's anything
something
technically wrong, but and to be fair to Leno as well, he made a number of very good saves.
I wanted to say that. Jeez,
there was a
saves.
one-on-one with Jacob Murphy after he'd already conceded to him the first time. He did a much better job coming out, making himself big, cutting off the angles, made a very good save there. When Murphy, that's a very high XG attempt on goal from Murphy. So Leno did very well there. He made another save just before the goal against Tonali. I don't know if you remember that one where Tonali sort of dinks it towards the back post and Leno has to make a diving save. Interestingly, I did just watch that before. And again, he doesn't actually knock the ball out of a dangerous area.
Mm.
He makes that save from Tonali, but Castagna, I think, had come on at that point, and Castagna has to make a very awkward clearance because it's about to fall to, I think it was Harvey Barnes had come on by that point on the wing. But again, maybe that is something that Leno maybe needs to look at a little bit, is just being able to knock that ball to a non-dangerous area a little bit more regularly, because he does invite errors. And it is sort of goalkeeping 101 to actually avoid putting the ball back into the danger area. And to see him do that multiple times in a single game is a little worrying. But again, I think
Well,
beforehand they'd said he's started 120 plus games in a row for Fulham. He's been arguably our most consistent player over the last 4 or 5 years. So I think we can allow a few little errors, not even errors here and there, but a few little imperfections from Bernd Leno.
I don't know, Jack. I think I would have thought this is a wonderful opportunity for a former elite goalkeeper to offer a bit of advice, and maybe just a couple of breadcrumbs, and you know, just a few little things softly said and in his
Yeah,
ear
look,
could be helpful.
slide into my DMs, Bernd, and I'll sort you out.
Yeah, there you
Or
go.
actually, if the club want to fly me over for a week or so, I can spend some one-on-one time with
Oh
him.
no, I think they should fly Bert Leno to you because you're very
No, no.
busy.
Yeah, but I'd like to sit on the balcony in the cottage for a week, so that'd be quite nice. No, look, it's disappointing to concede in that fashion, unfortunately. But look, as a few people had said beforehand, we could have easily lost that game 6 or 7-1. So to lose it 2-1 is disappointing, but I'd say the overall performance was probably more disappointing. Fortunately, in a way, no more injuries out of this game. But Dad, I know we've talked about it a few times across the last handful of podcasts, but this injury crisis is really starting to get a little bit worrying, don't you think?
Well, we talked about it at length, didn't we? In our WhatsApp group, we probably should have taken that conversation to the Discord just to wind people up even more. But um, I immediately went to a frustration right back to our transfer window
Yeah.
activity. Because it suddenly just struck me that, look, we've got the numbers. Of course, we've got the numbers. We've got 25 players, and they're absolutely our starting 11 is really, really quite good for who we are as a club.
Mm.
But I think we've got depth, but we don't have quality in depth in every area. And unfortunately, we've just been a bit unlucky to be hit in areas that we're a bit vulnerable.
Yeah.
Um, and look at how we've ridden through the Joachim Anderson and the Anthony Robinson injuries, because we have quality in depth. But
Mm.
in the midfield, if Berger or Lukic are out, it immediately is a bit of a crisis for us. With two strikers out, massive problem.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me that was a really terrible situation where you've got two strikers out and a third, which we should talk about as well, reluctant to be used. How do you get a goal? How do you find a goal? Not that that's our only avenue, but it's kind of the most likely way we're going to score goals and therefore collect points. So that was, I just sort of, it triggered me about, if you think you can sit on your haunches in a window and just pick up a couple of key players because you like the look of them, but not really address the key weaknesses in the squad, you're being a bit naive to the
Mm.
possibility that a few injuries are going to put you in a really, really dangerous situation. And here we are.
Yeah, I mean, the counterpoint to that was sort of made that you are only allowed a squad of 25. You also have some restrictions around that and around the number of players you can bring in, and the number of homegrown players you have to have in that squad as well. So there are a few considerations there, and I think there were comments made, and I guess we'll touch on it. The fact that we saw Kusiasare make his debut for the club, only got a handful of minutes, so you can't really judge him on that. But he's clearly a player Marco didn't really want. At the same time, though, if Raul gets injured, which we've sort of seen him injured already this season and unavailable, and Jimenez, not Jimenez, Muniz is currently out as well, we don't really have a third striker, so we kind of do need Kusiasare in a way. It's just Silva doesn't trust him yet. But how many more players can we really have? Like,
No,
just...
wasn't
there's admittedly a lack of depth in a handful of positions, but I mean, at the moment we've got Berger and Lukic both available. Kearney coming off the bench, Josh King Iwobi able to play in the centre. So, are we really lacking depth in the centre, or is it more around Marco's unwillingness to play Iwobi central when he's clearly a very good central player as well?
I think for our ambitions, I think. Wash my mouth out, but I don't think Harrison Reed would, is our preferred starting level of quality. Tom Kearney he can't be relied upon to do it for us week in, week out as a starting player. He can be very, very good in the right games for 20, even 30 minutes. I think he's still got that much in him. But, I think we've all been screaming out for a really high quality number 8. And arguably we've got Berger playing in there who may even be preferred in a different position. So I think we're far from having an equitable level of quality in the middle of the park, for sure. I think... so anyway, I don't think it's panic stations, but geez, we're not far away. God forbid, touch wood, touch everything. If we got 2 more injuries in key positions, I would be really worried.
I think it massively depends on where those injuries come. Obviously, Anderson's out for 5 or 6 weeks now. If we then lost Bassi all of a sudden, things get tight. Because all of a sudden then we'd need to see Tete probably starting at centre-back, which... Again, we'd probably get away with, but you'd have, Diop and Cuenca as your starting backline, and then literally
it becomes makeshift. It's makeshift.
As we saw a misser on the bench yesterday, and you can see how deep we're having to dig now. The fact that we got a misser on the bench. I think, has Seth Ridgen been on the bench this season? I think he did make the bench in one of the games. It's getting tight. We do seem to have a bit of backing on the wings, but knowing that Silva does not like using youth, and that's one of my biggest frustrations with Marco, who I do love as a manager, but the fact that we've got a number of good youth players, and you'd see, other teams around. You look at someone like Newcastle, who played Lewis Miley and just sort of stuck him in and gave him a chance in a similar way to how we've done with Josh King, and all of a sudden he's become one of their key players in midfield. I feel like we've probably got some players like, maybe a Missa, a Senga as well, who's a good left back. Seth Ridgen, I know he's young, but give him a chance. And especially when you've got an injury crisis like this, why are we not throwing on players like Kusiasare earlier in games where we're losing or games where we need something different? There's just a few frustrations there around the way Silva handles some of these situations. I agree the depth is being massively tested, but... the decisions that are made around that as well seem to frustrate me sometimes. I don't know if I'm not the only one based on what we see talked about in the Discord and the conversations we have on our WhatsApp as well. Your thoughts on that? Do you think Marco's maybe shooting himself in the foot a little bit? I know that there's obviously the argument that he's not being backed by the board in terms of recruitment, but do you feel like he's helping himself sometimes as well?
Well, firstly, I think all the points you make are perfectly reasonable. We do have a few possibly unknown, but maybe good enough youth players that, given the situation, could rise to a challenge. And I don't know that they'd completely embarrass you. And there must be opportunities for 10 minutes here against the right opposition to give them a chance to show. I think JKA yesterday was given a ridiculously short period, and you cannot draw any conclusion from that at all, because he literally was near the ball twice, and possibly he tried to backhead one ball from my
Oh, he
memory.
was given
And
nothing really.
yeah, nothing.
Yeah.
So, but you can't accuse him of anything, you know. So I think you're absolutely right in saying that um, there are opportunities opening up here for to try something new, and who knows, you might just find a little nugget. You might find a pearl, but you have to be realistic. Even in the best of situations, this is not what Marco is. Not the way he plays it. He's not brave enough. He might describe that in a different way, but in my view, he's just not brave and confident enough. And it's not going to change, because I think things are just getting worse. The chemistry at the club with Marco at maybe at the centre or the fringe of it, however you want to look at it, is becoming, well, acute might be too strong a word, but I think if you were really close to the whole situation, you could maybe see the fractures. But now it seems very obvious. Seems to, despite appearances and public words of support from the Khans and from Silver as well, there are clearly problems and frustrations, and I think a stubborn and frustrated Marco is digging in even further, and it's not really bringing out the best in him. And I think, to me, it just seems like the writing's on the wall here. I think we seem to have come to the end of a period and a phase, which has been a good one, but I can't see it improving, because I think the dynamic, the way I simplistically see it, is that Shahid Khan might be a good businessman, but he's not deeply involved. He's barely here. He's insistent on having his son as the director of football, who I can't be convinced is the best choice for that position, and I don't think I'm alone. He's also seems to be deeply happy and comfortable with Ali Mack as the CEO. I think the composite of all that is just not working for Marco Silva. So whilst maybe on a day-to-day basis he has no real problem with the CEO, and they probably get on just fine, and he probably gets on just fine with Shahid as well. But I think the whole thing just isn't working, because the way in which they want to run the club, and that extends beyond just the CEO, but it's probably people in key positions in recruitment, in the commercial side of things, in the director of football side of things, how all of that works results in an infrastructure that's not really working for me. And I don't know which manager that's going to work for, because it seems like it's like a little family business run like a corner shop rather than a professional elite sports team. It's run in a very protective, kind of closely held way, rather than using the money and deploying your money to hire the absolute best team you possibly can. And I think we've got some real problems, which I don't know that is ever going to change until we have a change of ownership. And at that point, I imagine Silver would be long gone.
Yeah, well, I think you're fractionally catastrophizing. I think about managers who go into.
How can you fractionally catastrophize? You're either going to accuse me of catastrophizing or not.
Well, because you didn't talk for long enough to fully catastrophize. You were, yeah. Anyway, I see managers go into other clubs and basically get told. I mean, look at managers who've gone into Tottenham and managed to get them Champions League football, and being told you have no transfer budget. You've got a squad that you can work with, but you're not signing players. If anything, you're probably losing players. So get on with it, basically. And I think if a new manager comes in and assumes that and it's a good squad that he's able to work with. Like, you look at this squad that Fulham have at the moment. It's a strong squad. We're seeing it by the fact that we've actually got, a lot of injuries, a lot of players unavailable. We're playing, probably 5 players who you wouldn't expect to play in your starting 11 currently. who I don't think would be in my starting 11, at least if I was to pick it. Um, so I feel like a new manager. I don't want a new manager mid-season. I think that would be too dramatic and too big an upheaval for Fulham at the moment. I'd like to see Silva get to the end of the season, but I I'm not I'm not sick of him, but I'm getting frustrated with the way he acts sometimes, and the fact that he puts his foot down on some things and really will not budge, and it's almost to make a statement at to the detriment of the results and of the club itself. So there's some frustrations there, and I'm ready for a change, but you have to have that correct transitional period, and I don't think sacking your manager is the way to go. I can't see us sacking him because, like we talked about before, I think he has enough credit in the bank. And the only way I can see him getting sacked is if we go on a really bad run, if we lost the next 5 games potentially, and you still see some of those weird decisions, those Silver style decisions where you're just not playing your best players out of, the reason he gave for Kevin not being selected was because he needs to work on his defensive work, and it's sort of like, well, he's not there for that. He's bought in to be an attacking player, so maybe you just accept that his defensive work isn't quite as good, but you take the attacking side of things as the flip side of that. In playing him will actually give us more going forward and potentially win us games by scoring goals. He's not there to protect the goal. So it's just those little
Jack,
annoyances that I
just
have at this stage
just
of
to
the
that
season.
point, I agree with you. I don't want to see a manager swapped out mid season. It's terrible. But and I totally agree that Marco is being quite petulant. Stubborn is one way to describe it, but it's very emotional and kind of not that adult sometimes, in the way that he seems to be behaving, and it's out of frustration that he can't have his way. Um, and it may well be that, from a results perspective, the owners aren't worried that, we're staring over the edge, and they know that Marco can bring it back, and that, when a few weeks' time, when a few players come back, he's got a slightly stronger squad. The results should improve. But it could be that things could boil over to a point where Marco loses his shit and he's throwing toys around, and the owners could turn around and go, actually, I'm not putting up with this, and actually axe him because they're sick of him. It's possible.
It's just hard to say because we just don't know what the Khans will do, and we don't really know what Silver will do. Maybe Silver will start to realise his job's slightly at risk, and maybe stop making some of these weird decisions and going, right, okay, made my point, can't really keep making my point, or I will lose my job. But again, will Silver do that? Because Silver might look at it and go, well, to be fair, I'm probably going to leave at the end of the season anyway because I'm not really happy where I am. So if I get sacked halfway through the season, is that big a deal? Maybe other jobs pop up mid-season that I might be. Well, I actually have more time to look for the correct job because I've just got generally more time available to me. It's
I'm so sick of this. I just don't want to be here anymore, and therefore I do.
I'm so sick of this. I just don't care anymore. So
yeah,
it's just
maybe it kind of looks a bit like there's a bit of that in the air.
That's sort of what I mean. It just feels a bit like it's sort of like, well, you know what? If that's the way it is, that's the way it is, and it's almost like he's happy to make his point to the detriment of the team at this stage, and that's probably not true. Let's be honest, but it's getting a little bit frustrating there.
It does look a bit like that from time to time. You're right.
It feels a bit like that sometimes, which is the frustration, I think. So, look, let's sort of wrap that game up. Disappointing loss. A very quick touch on Fulham going to Wickham this week, fourth round of the Carabao Cup. Not a huge amount to talk on this one. I'd say a must win because it would be ridiculous if we lost this game. But you're expecting very full rotation here?
Well, mad if you don't. There's no reason why, our absolute second string and a couple of youth off the bench couldn't do a job here, really. But we'll wait and see. I think it's also a pretty big opportunity to progress It's kind of a lucky run so far. So you don't want to be too loose about it. You want to make sure of it because, how many games after this one before you're at Wembley? Not that many. So you don't want to be too loose about it because this could be the only positive kind of thing that happens to us this season.
Well, agree. Like, I think when things aren't going particularly well in the league, sometimes a little cup run can actually maybe get you back on track a little bit. So I'm hopeful that we
Sure.
do get something out of this game. Um, it's expected. It's worrying if we don't, I'd say. Um, so yeah, fingers crossed this one's not a banana skin for us. I don't think it will be, but you never know. When you've got the number of injuries we have, Marco might need to rotate even more to really protect some of those players who he needs going forward.
Quite.
So it'll be interesting to see what kind of team we put out, how that team plays as well, and what kind of result we can get against Wickham. Dad, I think we can wrap it up there. As always,
Indeed.
a big shout out to our Discord. Please jump into the Discord if you haven't already. You can find all the links in our social media platforms, on all our social media platforms. So feel free to reach out. If you can't, we will definitely set you up with a link. Dad, thanks for joining today.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I look forward to going back into the garden and catching a bit of sun.
And forgetting all about this is what you mean. It's never fun to talk about games like this, but has to be done. Thank you again to everyone who continues to listen to That's So Craven. We really appreciate the support. Jump into the Discord, join in the conversation, follow along for the games. And as always, come on, you Whites. You Whites!